Vipassana meditation. It happens to be the meditation method that the Buddha used in his awakening, and it's what he taught for 45 years. I teach that meditation method in the broader framework of the Eightfold Path. So do you know anything about the Eightfold Path? Oh, okay. So nothing new here. The important thing to remember about that is that it's not just meditation. It's meditation within that broader framework of the Eightfold Path. Each class we start with a 20-minute or a 30-minute meditation, depending on what class it is. And then I give a teaching. Everything I teach is based on what the Buddha taught as preserved in the Pali Canon. I don't teach anything outside of that because that's enough. And again, just to remember that it's meditation within this broader framework that develops awakening. And I'll talk a little bit more later on about developing your own practice, and I hope you continue to join us. So, and I'll talk us into the meditation method. Tonight's sutta is on the Sambodhi Sutta, the sutta on the wings to self-awakening. And it's a very important sutta, like they all are, but it points to the importance of developing your own practice within the right framework, like I just said. So you came on a good night, Allie. So we'll get to that after our meditation. So find your relaxed meditative posture and gently close your eyes and gently close your mouth. Excuse me. And holding your back straight but not stiff, your ears aligned with your shoulders and nose aligned with your navel, and holding yourself very loosely, very gently, very lovingly. Allow yourselves to settle into this room, settle onto your seats, settle into your bodies, and settle into your minds. And take a moment to become aware of the sensation of breathing in your body. Just get a feel for what that's like. To be mindful of your breath in your body. And while remaining mindful of your breath in your body, notice that thoughts are flowing. We're conscious beings. Thoughts should be flowing. The purpose of meditation is to not be distracted by your own thoughts. So when you find that you're caught up in your thinking again, simply acknowledge that and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. I'll repeat that. When you find that you're caught up in your thinking again, that and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. Relaxing your thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. And we'll meditate for 20 minutes with callbacks every 5 minutes. Relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. Relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. If a persistent thought or feeling arises, stay with it for a moment or two. Recognize it as impermanent and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. And we'll meditate for 5 more minutes. take a moment to notice the quality of your mind. And when you're ready, you can gently open your eyes. So just for putting this in the context, and since Ali's new tonight, the Buddha awakened to something called dependent origination, which states that from ignorance through 12 observable causative links, all manner of confusion, deluded thinking, and ongoing disappointing experiences arise. In a word, that's dukkha. So dependent origination describes the individual experience and contribution to confusion, deluded thinking, and suffering arises. And the Four Noble Truths describe the experience of suffering, of dukkha. The individual cause, in a very succinct way, the Second Noble Truth. And then the Third Noble Truth describes that it's possible to end this individual process of contributing to our own suffering. And the Fourth Noble Truth is the Eightfold Path as a path leading to the cessation of all manner of suffering. Four Noble Truths. That's the Buddha taught that on his very first teaching, and everything that he would teach for the next 45 years of his teaching career before he passed was taught in the context of Four Noble Truths and to develop an understanding and the cessation of that initial ignorance of Four Noble Truths. Pretty simple and direct teachings. Ali, have you heard anything like this before? Okay. And again, the reason why I bring that up is just to say that everything the Buddha taught was in that context so that we can recognize our own ignorance of Four Noble Truths and develop an understanding of these four truths. So this sutta, the Sambodhi Sutta, the Wings to Awakening, I love the name, is a teaching where the Buddha emphasizes that singular point that it's up to us if we're going to develop awakening. It's a self-awakening process. When the Buddha described his own awakening and himself as an awakened human being, he declared that I am now a rightly self-awakened one. In other words, it wasn't something that was imposed on him. It wasn't something that he gained from doing a lot of good acts. Of course, he was a very compassionate and well-behaved human being. But it had to do with him developing an understanding of these same Four Noble Truths that were the wings to his own awakening. He was a rightly self-awakened one. And this sutta is about the word that's used as the prerequisites, meaning these are things that are qualities of mind and behavior that are required as part of a Dhamma practice to awaken. You'll notice that some of these things that I'll describe in just a short while have become more of a Dhamma practice themselves rather than developing the Eightfold Path. In other words, where you can't just act yourself towards awakening. You have to change the way that you think. But these are the requisites. The Buddha was at Anatta Pandika's monastery at Jita's Grove. He asked those gathered friends, if those of other sects would ask you, what are S-E-C-T-S, not S-E-X. If those of other sects would ask you, what are the prerequisites for developing the wings of self-awakening, how would you respond? The monks and nuns asked the Buddha to tell them his response so that they would remember it clearly. See then, the prerequisites for developing the wings to self-awakening are here for you, meaning they're available to everyone within the Dhamma. The first is having admirable friends and companions. Very first thing the Buddha said. What he's talking about now, he's addressing the monks and nuns of the first original Sangha, isn't he? And he's stressing the importance that you have a well-focused Sangha. You're focused on the Dhamma. This is what he calls admirable friends. We're very fortunate what's developed here, that we have a lot of people that are well-focused on the Dhamma. Next, he says that remaining virtuous and restrained and understanding the danger of even the slightest faults. And that relates directly to the middle factors, the virtuous factors of the Eightfold Path, doesn't it? Right speech, right action, and right livelihood. Again, remember, he's teaching this to a group of monks and nuns that already know the Dhamma. They know the Four Noble Truths. They know the Eightfold Path. I'm only emphasizing that to not take this out of context. If you're going to be truly virtuous, but your mind is confused and your thinking is slightly diluted in relation to ignorance of Four Noble Truths, you need some kind of framework to recognize that delusion, don't you? And that's where the Eightfold Path comes in. And specifically, as far as virtuous behavior, right speech, right action, and right livelihood are paramount. I would bet every one of you that has developed the Eightfold Path would say that it was right speech that you first kind of sunk your teeth into, as recognizing where your behavior might have been a little bit off. Is that right? Almost everybody sees that, because as we gain the ability to watch what's coming out of our mouth, we'll realize where we're not engaged in the Eightfold Path. And this develops to very subtle levels. And most importantly, the speech that we're telling ourselves, that story we have going on in our minds all the time. As we start deepening our concentration, meditation, and start developing the broader framework of the Eightfold Path, we realize what we're doing to ourselves. And we realize that, using that phrase, it's really an inside job. How we're thinking about ourselves in relation to the world, and how we're thinking about ourselves in relation to ourselves. That sounds almost like a contradiction when you hear the word Anatta, that it's wrong views of self that are the real problem. But we have to recognize that this is what we're doing. This is what this sutta is about, the wings to self-awakening. The Buddha continues, hearing easily sober talk, meaning talk that is inspired by the Dhamma, hearing easily sober talk and talks conducive to gaining understanding, on modesty, contentment, the value of seclusion and quiet, talks on non-entanglement, persistence, virtue, concentration, discernment, and the knowledge of true vision and release from craving and clinging, the second noble truth. The second noble truth states that craving originates and clinging perpetuates suffering. Directly, how to recognize that and abandon it here. Remaining persistent for abandoning unskillful mental qualities and for developing skillful qualities. Makes sense, doesn't it? Resolute and right effort, the sixth factor of the Eightfold Path. Furthermore, for one developing the wings to self-awakening, they would maintain discernment and understanding of the impermanence and the cessation of stress, meaning developing the Eightfold Path. How important it is to recognize that the stressors in our lives, whether it's things that we're chasing after that make us feel great, or the things that we hope to continually avoid, are all impermanent. And as we develop the understanding of the Dhamma, we recognize the arising and the passing away of all things. And the best lesson for the arising and the passing away of all things, for the impermanence of all things, is being mindful of the sensation of breathing. The in-breath is the arising, the out-breath is the passing away. We developed to very, very subtle levels of recognizing the impermanence of our own thoughts. And once we get to that point, Lao Tzu, the great Chinese sage, said, once you recognize the impermanence of all things, you'll let go of everything. Why would you want to hold on to something that is fleeting, like foam on the ocean, as the Buddha often said? Recognizing the impermanence of all things through the Eightfold Path. The Buddha continues, when one has admirable friends and companions, it is expected that they will be virtuous and restrained, seeing dangerous and even the slightest fall. There's a common theme underlying much of the Buddha's teachings about the importance of what we associate with. And what and who we associate with will determine to a great extent what we're going to experience. So we could be the most virtuous-minded individual. But if we're hanging around, it's an old word I use, if we're hanging around with a bunch of scoundrels, we're going to be a scoundrel. I had a friend of mine years ago, had nothing to do with the Dhamma. He used to say, if you're in a room and you're looking in front of you and there's a duck, and to your left there's a duck, and to your right there's a duck, and behind you there's a duck, it's a pretty good chance you're a duck. What we associate with and who we associate with is, to a great extent, is going to determine our life experience. And that doesn't mean we should stay away from everybody unless they're absolutely pure. That's ridiculous. That's not the middle way. The Buddha taught the Eightfold Path as the middle way. But to understand the danger of even the slightest fault. We should understand it. Doesn't mean we can avoid it all the time, but recognize it. Also, that he's talking to a well-focused Sangha. He's talking to the original Sangha, the original monks and nuns. And he's stressing the importance to support each other in remaining focused on his Dhamma. So fortunate what's developed here that we can do that with like-minded people. The Buddha continues, when one has admirable friends and companions, it is expected that they will hear sober talk and talks conducive to gaining understanding. They will hear talks on modesty, contentment, the value of seclusion and quiet, non-entanglement, persistence, virtue, concentration, discernment, and the knowledge of true vision and release from craving and clinging. That last line, the knowledge of true vision, is pointing to the first factor of the Eightfold Path, of right view. The vision to see things clearly and well framed by the Eightfold Path. Confusion, delusion that leads to ongoing disappointing experiences, ongoing distraction of trying to maintain a self-referential ego self, which is really the biggest stress of all, isn't it? Admirable friends, what we associate with. The Buddha is, now it's interesting too, when you remember the setting, 2,600 years ago. This is the very first Sangha. There's no way of knowing how far into the Buddha's teaching because the suttas aren't presented in a chronological order. But I'm gathering that this is probably about 6 months to a year into the Buddha's teachings career, which means he's probably talking to 2,000 or 3,000 monks or nuns, which itself is remarkable, isn't it? And he's stressing again and again the importance of supporting each other in the Dhamma. Remember how this sutta started. If those of other sects ask you, what's the most important thing? Having admirable friends, having people well-focused in the Dhamma. Over the years, I've been teaching for about 8 years here in Frenchtown, and 8 years in total. I started in Frenchtown. Not so much now, but for the first few years, there was always this subtle and sometimes not so subtle push to why don't we do some other things in here? Why don't we introduce other teachings or other modern Buddhist teachers? Why don't we do some kind of modern New Age spiritual rituals? And again, I'm not putting any of those things down. They're all very wholesome practices. But from the time I started this, I wanted to have one place in the world at least that is just focused on what the Buddha taught. And why shouldn't it be? This is the awakened human being that gave us his teachings. And these are his teachings. This man that awakened 2,600 years ago and presented his teachings in such a way that they could be preserved and are still present in this room today. I think that's one of the most remarkable things in my life, that these teachings are still here, and they're still here in their pure form. We're still able to associate ourselves with them in that way. I know I'm emphasizing, maybe overemphasizing it, but does everybody get the importance of that wise association with people in the Dhamma and the Dhamma itself? Yes, no? Okay.
The duck metaphor was helpful.
It's true, though.
The Sangha ducks.
Yeah, that's right. Dhamma ducks. I should mention that was a quote from this gentleman named Riley Reagan, who was many years ago. He was pretty big in local politics. He almost ran. He did run for governor one time, but he was also had a great influence on the development of mental health policy in New Jersey, and actually on the East Coast. So, really good guy. The Buddha continues. For when one understands, did I miss something? I did. When one has admirable friends and companions, it is expected they will maintain discernment and understanding of impermanence and the cessation of stress. Once these qualities are developed, there are 4 more to develop. Contemplation of what is unattractive, so as to abandon craving. Even those things that at first we might find attractive, when we realize the trap in being attached to them or clinging to them or needing them for our happiness, or at least thinking we do, we'll recognize the unattractiveness of them and we'll cease clinging to them. One way to recognize the unattractiveness of things is simply to recognize the impermanence of it. Onto it. Why would we crave after something that itself is impermanent? Goodwill should be developed so as to abandon ill will. Mindfulness of the breath in the body should be developed so as to develop non-distraction. They should develop understanding of impermanence so as to root out conceit and further eye-making. For when one understands impermanence, clinging to anatta, to the not-self characteristic, is abandoned. When we recognize the impermanence of these self-referential views, we'll simply let them go. There's no big process of analysis. There's no getting into anything such as, and especially not judging ourselves harshly for having wrong views rooted in ignorance. We simply recognize them and let it go. Understanding not self uproots conceit. Unbinding arises in this moment when we recognize ongoing eye-making, ongoing conceit. And it's a harsh word, isn't it? People don't like to hear that word. But remember, it's conceit rooted in ignorance. It's eye-making rooted in ignorance, which simply means we don't understand what we're doing. If we did, we wouldn't engage in this process in the first place, would we? But it becomes so, remember, there's no beginning. The Buddha taught there's no beginning to any of this process. If you try to find it, you're just going to continue your own distraction. The problem is ignorance of Four Noble Truths. Again, the Buddha is not saying, and I'm not saying that we're ignorant because we're human beings. We're not. All of us function at a pretty high level. It's got nothing to do with general ignorance. It has to do with that very specific ignorance of Four Noble Truths. And it takes an eightfold path to recognize and abandon that ignorance if we're to become rightly self-awakened ones. So again, that eightfold path begins with right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and finally, right meditation or right concentration. Meditation is one factor of this eightfold path. The reason why it's only one factor, but probably the most important, not to diminish the other 7 factors, is that we need to develop a measure of concentration. So distracted by this thing, this not self characteristic trying to always maintain itself. The biggest difficulty that people have when they begin a meditation practice is boredom. They just can't, most of us, we can't be comfortable sitting for just a few minutes and not doing anything. The mind wants to be engaged in something. It wants to be distracted. For distraction right here in this moment, isn't it? And isn't it curious that adult people find it so difficult to just sit quietly and do nothing for just a few minutes? But almost everybody I've ever taught, and myself included, struggled, at least initially, to just sit quiet and be mindful of my breath. Because my ego and our egos need constant stimulation. They need to establish itself. A self-referential ego self must establish itself in every thought, word, and idea that occurs. It must be a self-referential thought. That's why there's such an intensely ongoing need for following one thought with the next thought with the next thought. It's another way of describing a conditioned mind that is conditioned towards that distraction of not self. Meditation used primarily for deepening concentration is so effective because as we deepen our concentration, we're able to recognize that ongoing process of eye-making. And as we develop the broader framework of the Eightfold Path, we see that clearly in all of our thoughts, words, and deeds. And we start seeing at such subtle levels, we realize that it is only our view of ourselves in relation to the world. Another way of saying that is the 3 marks of existence of impermanence, the not self characteristic, and the resulting dukkha. Gaining insight into that process allows us to become rightly self-awakened. We ourselves are responsible for recognizing and abandoning the cause of the result of our own ignorance. And how do we do it? Again, think about this in a conceptual way. If you're ignorant of something, how do you know that you're ignorant of it? How do you even know? How would you know? If you're deluded about something, how would you know that you're deluded about something? You need a framework for that framework to point it out to you. And that's why the Buddha taught an Eightfold Path. It's really the only reason. When he awakened, when he became a rightly self-awakened one, he thought for a few more weeks, was it possible to teach other human beings what he now knew, understanding what he knew of conditioned thinking, that need to continue to ignore anything that would challenge your own ignorance? deluded thinking? How could he teach it? And that's when he developed an Eightfold Path to overcome that common human problem of a distracted, conditioned mind. There's more to this article. That's about halfway through if you want to finish it online, but I think that's enough for tonight, isn't it? Any questions about this sutta itself, and then we'll go around the room?
If it wouldn't be too much, never mind. I'll read it online. I was going to ask.
No, please.
So in the Sutta, the Buddha's giving like specific attributes that one needs to become a rightly self-awakened.
Yes, very practical advice. Yes.
Okay, and that I was just gonna. I was gonna ask to like kind of go over them again, but that was fun. I don't want to. That you just did that. I can go over in my own time and kind of study it and like digest it more.
Yes, and when you do that, to the Eightfold Path, because that's really how we do it. Right. I mean, if we want to know, am I developing admirable friends in the Dhamma? We have to do it from the perspective of the Eightfold Path, don't we?
So would that be the most important thing? As
far as developing the Dhamma itself, it's nearly impossible, I think it is, to do it on your own or to do it as part of something than just the Dhamma, because it gets very confusing that way. The reason why I say that is there's this ongoing push, it's been going on for 150 years, at least in the West, to develop this kind of Western hybridized type of Buddhism. And this push to kind of reconcile there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's about 12 major Buddhist schools, lineages, religions, and then hundreds of subsets of these different schools. And none of them are what the Buddha actually taught. I'm not putting them down. It's just the Buddha couldn't teach and wouldn't teach 12 different Dhammas, would he? He taught one very specific Dhamma. Over the 2,600 years, different adaptations and accommodations have been made to the Buddha's original teachings to accommodate charismatic individuals and cultural influences. And so today we have a modern Buddhism that is, I have an article online called A Thicket of Views. They're very contradictory to what the Buddha actually taught. Again, I'm not putting it down. It's just the way it is. And they don't have the same origination or the same goal of recognizing and abandoning confusing and deluded thinking. They substitute a lot of different things for it. The Buddha taught this very simple and direct path. Start incorporating other things, the path is often lost. So in relation to this talk today, Ananda, who was the Buddha's cousin and chief second for the last 25 years of his life and was there for most of the Buddha's teachings, asked the Buddha one day, what's the most important thing about your Dhamma? And Ananda is waiting for this great mystical, magical answer, the most important thing. And the Buddha looked at his cousin and said, the most important thing is the Sangha. You can't do it alone. You can't do it alone. But it takes a well-focused Sangha too. I don't know if you've read my biography online, you know, maybe heard me talk about it. I was involved in, for many, many years in the Tibetan lineage of modern Buddhism. And again, in my experience, I just got more and more confused and disappointed. And finally, out of frustration, I took my vows in a certain Tibetan lineage. Out of frustration, I left that behind and started getting involved in Zen Buddhism and studied with some of the great teachers, modern great teachers there. And again, I got more confused and more frustrated. And the awakening was never clearly defined, and it was always taught that it takes endless lifetimes in order to develop awakening, and a lot of other things that seem contradictory, until I finally realized that if an awakened human being taught something, why would he teach it in such an ambiguous way? And that's when I started looking at the Sutta Pitaka in the Pali Canon, and I realized that the Buddha didn't teach any of those things. He taught that awakening takes place or can take place in this lifetime, in this present moment. And that it's simple and direct, and it's up to us if we're going to do that. It's not up to anybody else. It's not up to any other teacher. Up to what we develop within ourselves. rooted in a well-concentrated mind that's developed in Shamatha-Vipassana meditation and framed by the Eightfold Path. So sorry for the long answer to that. But
no. Thank you for the long answer.
That's what it is. That's the thing. Tim and I were talking a little earlier. It is a very simple and direct path. But because we have this thing called conditioned thinking, it seems complicated. At times it seems out of reach. It seems like it's impossible, when it really is simple. It's as simple as sitting quietly and being mindful of our breath. That's where we begin. Everybody can do it, even though we have an awful lot of resistance to that. So let's go around the room. Nash, good to see you tonight. Do you have any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I had an auspicious moment. With, I was in a group of people, and I observed something, and I was the only one that noticed it. And it wasn't like a big, scary, terrible thing, but it was something that if I like mentioned it, it would have upset everyone, and not in like a great, terrible way, but it just. And I caught myself thinking, with my understanding of what right speech is like not speaking to harm or like continue like suffering. And the event happened, it was gone, and I decided to not share, just to like let it truly pass. Because I realized that because I almost said it and I caught myself, and not struggling, but like working on trying to figure out where I'm like realizing the suffering, like if I'm realizing it at like the moment of contact, like you'll say, or in my reaction to it. And that was like a clear example of my reaction to it, because I didn't really let the moment pass. I like kind of was like thinking about it, and I was going to say something, and then like through my almost reacting, I was able to find it.
Yeah, that's how we practice restraint. And it really doesn't matter if it's post an initial reaction. The problem is when we continue to react to something. That's when we've literally lost our mind, become mindless. You practice the refined mindfulness framed by the Eightfold Path in that moment, recognizing that your speech was about to be hurtful in some way. Or another aspect of wrong speech is simply speech that is unnecessary, that's going to fall on deaf ears. It's a practical matter. But if you think about what you restrained was the need to interject Nash into something. That's an aspect of eye-making that you recognize and practice restraint in exactly the way it should be done. That's the practical application of the Dhamma.
Right. And
so you cease creating, in a general way, suffering for yourself and other people in that moment. That's exactly how it works. You were here for the Shamatha Sutta, the Sutta on the 2 arrows. You didn't stick the second arrow in.
Right.
You know, that's the metaphor. Yeah, but that's fine.
I was able to put it aside.
And it's at that point that we begin to end wrong views also, by recognizing how they're coming up in our life. Again, you employed the framework of the Eightfold Path exactly how it should be. So good for you, and thank you for recognizing it and bringing it here tonight.
One other quick thing, I noticed today I had a stretch of time that I was really able to like stay with my breath, and I wasn't becoming distracted. And when I finally snapped out of it, I like not snapped out of it, but like snap was the word that came to my mind when I got distracted again. And I kind of imagined like it's hard to describe, but almost like a balloon, like with doing this, like I'm creating this concentration, and then when I am distracted, it kind of like it collapses again, but it's a little bit bigger.
Yeah, and so you're also noticing the impermanence of concentration too. Even that doesn't last. But what you develop is a well-concentrated mind that is supple enough to live in the world in a very mindful way. So we don't become rigidly focused on concentration, but that concentration carries over. And the view that we develop from the Eightfold Path becomes an expression of our life. In other words, we we get to the point where we're not thinking, oh, is this right speech? Is this right action? Is this right view? It simply becomes an expression of an awakened human being. Thank you. Isabel, good to see you tonight.
Good to see you. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for asking. You're the only one that ever asks.
So after Tuesday's class, I was really, I don't know, it really did something to me. It was, if there was the idea of like, we were talking about the emptiness of, and yeah, we were talking about emptiness and of ignorance, and I don't know, I had a very heavy emotional response to it afterwards, because it wasn't just, it was kind of all these like events, like, and it all happened in like a short amount of time, you know, from the sutta, and then having a conversation, and then I just had this like very emotional reaction, and I realized that I was like causing my own suffering, like in that moment, like I had, where I've kind of been recognizing where I haven't been sticking the arrow in, like this time I recognized that like I did stick that second arrow in, and I don't know, it's I'm finding peace like within recognizing those moments as well, and that is, yeah, I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. It's amazing when you recognize it. I think you kind of get now what I say, that you can be at peace with less than peaceful mind states. And when that's a profound understanding, because at that point you don't need, even if you're not feeling wonderful, you know, it's kind of put on us that we're always supposed to be feeling something amorphous, but it's supposed to be wonderful, always supposed to be happy, always supposed to be positive. That's not life. It doesn't reflect the First Noble Truth. When we can be at peace with what's occurring, even if it's the realization of the need to become empty of our own ignorance. I mean, that's really what I think you were coming up against.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It was like I felt, now having this time, like, it's not like I've even been sitting with it. It just kind of came up like after meditating right now, and speaking of the sutta, just in my head just popped up like you were, I think that was like your ego battling, like you had this emotional response to your ego, like your ego says. I just felt like sharing.
Thank you. Yeah. You never knew that you were having that battle with your ego. So there ain't no going back now. You know too much. So thank you. Tim, good to see you tonight. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for asking.
Meditation's going great. The concentration level is getting better and better. And with what you were talking about, with the concentration becoming more profound, I'm at more peace with my surroundings. And I'm seeing things a lot more clearly, like we talked about earlier. Tuesday was a pretty intense class, and I mean that in a non-extreme way, because what I really got out of that, and I thought to share with everybody, was the middle path, the not extreme views. People ask about relationships or anything. You can love someone too much, you can love someone not enough. And when it goes, when you look at that towards the Eightfold Path and through your own way, those things are good to be mindful of. And the simplicity of it all is starting to really, you had mentioned once where it's more like a ladder, rungs on a ladder. They intertwine. It's starting to do that. And it's wonderful because I can see with work and with my relationships and with just life around, things are just more clear, more peaceful, and it's a good thing. And the emptiness, we all tend to try to associate, or I do, internalize it, which is really part of my making, right?
Yep.
But reading the suttas ahead of time helps, and I don't have a hard time articulating it, but the only thing I can really say is that when the Buddha was speaking, when he completes the circle with the emptiness, it's just that simple.
Yeah.
You know, and that was something that I really took with me, and I'm glad I was here for it.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm glad you're here for it too. That sutta is remarkable. It's a little bit difficult to teach because of how repetitive and conceptual the Buddha gets, but only to bring you back full circle to what's important: a well-concentrated mind. All those other qualities, imagined qualities of mind that he talks about in that sutta, are all empty of anything that's useful. Come back to a well-concentrated mind. Thank you. Greg, good to see you tonight. How are you?
I'm very good.
Good.
Very good.
I'm good.
Yeah. I just can't stop thinking that every sutta. So I kind of don't really believe in much purpose or reason or like divine. You know, when things kind of fall into place, I appreciate it, but not like, oh, this is meant to be serendipitous. But every week has been like exactly what I've been thinking about or like struggling with, like hitting it on the head. And even when I didn't come, because I read ahead of time, I was debating whether I should stay home. And then I read about what the sutra was going to be about, was about how sometimes you need to just be alone, or like last week or so. Yep. I was like, all right, I guess I'm staying home. But it seems like like this one, you say the importance is really put on the Sangha and surrounding yourself with the community. And like all this last week, I just couldn't stop thinking about how great it is. Like I still can't quite get over how close I am to this place. Yeah. And just accidentally fell into it. So that's all really neat, and I'm really excited about it. Yeah, and I think coming here, I'm going to try and come as often as I can, but even once a week, just really this stuff that I've read before, learned before, and then just kind of put it, I got really into the minutia and I studied philosophy and got very into the details and comparing the different schools against each other and the atomists and is there everything, nothing, and like Tuesday again was just it made me realize this stuff is important. I didn't waste all my time, but also I probably should have just been meditating instead of worrying so much about the little details that I really got hung up on. And you know, now that I have the proper, I did a lot of chakra stuff, Kundalini, Tumo. You know, I didn't get into meditation because I wanted to be like Buddha. I wanted to be like Yoda, or Master Splinter, or who's the other guy? Mr. Miyagi. You know, I wanted to be able to grab stuff out of the air and just like move things with my mind.
Catch a flying chopstick.
Yeah, and I think that's what gets a lot of people into it. They want they want to open their third eye and see the future and, you know, all that. And not that I wasted a lot of time, because I think it did focus, you know, it helps with, it definitely focused attention and things, but, you know, since finding what the Buddha clearly didn't teach any of that stuff, you know, focusing on the breath has been the most profound thing.
Isn't it?
Yeah, and it's just great to see it growing so rapidly and exponentially, it seems like. Yeah, it's just.
I agree. I'm going to come as often as I can, too.
You should. A little.
All of those things, I did all those things, too. You know, I first came to a meditation practice or Eastern philosophical practice because I loved the idea that I read Autobiography of a Yogi. I saw that movie, I can't think of the name of it, where the pilot lands in Shangri-La and there's people that are a million years old and all this. Anyway, I wanted all those things. I wanted to have the ability to transport myself from here. I've mentioned Pluto before, travel around in my astral body. And I studied with some people that actually taught me how to do those things. I realized it was just all my imagination. And even if it wasn't, it was really an example of continued eye making. I was just trying to have some experience. And I was using that experience so that I could avoid my own ignorance of what was occurring. And I kind of had that, when I finally hit me, when I realized what I was doing, I went through a long period of judging myself harshly for how stupid could I be. None of that is even true. It's not a matter of being stupid. It's simply a matter of recognizing your own ignorance and doing something about it. And you're right, we are so fortunate. I say this so often, and it might sound a little self-aggrandizing, but I don't mean it that way. We are incredibly fortunate for what's developed here in Frenchtown. That we have all of you, and it's a Tuesday and a Saturday Sangha too. They're so well focused on developing this understanding of an awakened human being. It's remarkable. So I'm glad you've joined us too. Kevin, good to see you tonight. I see you signed up for the retreat.
Yes.
Great.
I think this sutta really, again, just to reiterate it, is really emphasize the importance of the Sangha.
Mm-hmm.
My meditation is regular, but it can be very distracting.
Yeah.
But when I come here, it's so much better, so much less distracted. So I think it is the kind of the force of the other meditators that really helps, or just being in the Sangha and knowing that I'm associating really helps. And then, hoping it'll carry me again to my meditation at home as well.
Yeah.
The battle continues with the distracted mind. So.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. But I mean, it's really true. So many people say that it's so much more, I'm going to say easier, but more effective to meditate as a group. And there is, what's the right word? I can't think of it. There's hierarchical proof that people that meditate together do have an effect on each other. Rupert Sheldrake, I don't know, some of you may have heard about that. He coined the term morphic resonance. And I won't get into the story. It had to do with monkeys, not meditators, how he came to that understanding. But he proved that there's a connection between consciousness, and I'm not pointing towards a non-dual reality or anything like that, interdependence or interconnectedness. It's just a fact. There's been studies that have shown that when groups of meditators get together, and they've done this over and over again, in cities with high crime rates, if they had a big enough group, and it wasn't huge, say 150 or 200 meditators getting together, the crime rate plummeted while these people were meditating. They've done this all over the country and all over the world. So there is a connection that we have as we quiet our minds, and we are supporting of each other in a setting like this. I've been meditating for 37, 38 years. I'm not going to say it's different, but it is. It's different when I come here than when I meditate twice a day at home every day for a half an hour. But there's a different quality here in this center, and it's because of meditating as a group, and we're all well focused. Thank you all. Jane, good to see you tonight. How are you? How's your practice going?
Excuse me. I haven't been practicing so much lately, but I have actually. I feel like I've been bringing the practice kind of into my life.
Oh, good.
Just kind of having this realization, even if I'm dealing with a lot of stress. I started a new job where it's very stressful, but it's a new approach to dealing with the stress, and not always perfect, but I'm okay with that because I know that's impermanent too.
Yeah.
So I feel like I've kind of been able to gain some self-control. And even tonight when I was meditating, I kind of came here last minute, because I felt like I needed to. I felt distracted at times, but then I was able to kind of tame it. And there were times when I sort of felt like just a few moments where I sort of felt like almost a vessel. I had this kind of weird experience. I felt very grounded, and But then most of the time I was very distracted.
Thank you. I'm glad you came too, and try to keep coming on your own. If you're trying to reinvigorate your meditation practice, go back to starting with just a couple of minutes, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes. That's enough. And if you can do that twice a day, every day, you'll have a very effective meditation practice. And then come with your dad on Thursday nights. I'm glad you're here tonight. Ali, welcome to our Sangha. How was your meditation tonight? And do you have any questions? Good. Well, I'm glad you're here. I hope you continue to join us. The same advice, if you're reinvigorating your meditation practice, start with just a few minutes twice a day if you can do that, and then gradually add some time. And remember, it's not just meditation; it's part of that broader framework. On my website, Becoming Dad. How did you hear about us here? All right.
I drove by and I saw the sign.
Oh, so.
Looks like a cute town.
Oh, well, I'm glad you did all that. On my website, becoming-buddha.com, there's a recording of this meditation method. You can use it to help guide you into it if you want. And I send out a newsletter twice a week about the Dhamma talks that I'll be giving. There's classes here 3 times a week, so I hope you join us again. Glad you joined us. Any other questions or comments about tonight's class before we finish with Metta? Okay. Our retreat's coming up, less than a month away. If you're going, and you know you're going, the sooner you sign up, the better, just for my logistics. So find your relaxed meditative posture and gently close your eyes and gently close your mouths. And take a moment to become aware of the sensation of breathing in your body, and let that mindfulness of your breath cease any distracting thoughts to the past or to the future, or that may have arisen from our talk today. And Metta means goodwill or loving kindness. Metta is both an aspiration for those of us developing the Eightfold Path and an expression of an awakened, fully mature human being. And these are the Buddha's words on Metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding, by not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. For a wonderful class tonight. Peace. Greg, I think I